Hey folks, here are your instructions for the transition assessment activity, which involves you drafting a PLAF specifically for the transition plan. Okay, starting from our course's Blackboard shell, select Major Assignments, and then select Transition Assessment Activity. In that folder, you will see that there are the instructions with the grading scale information. And you'll also see a link in green font, which is where you would submit your final product. Of course, I recommend reading the instructions in their entirety before continuing on with this video. One of the first things that you see in the instructions would be that there is a link to a Google Drive folder. And that's where there is case information for several fictitious students. It's up to you which of the cases you choose to work. I'll pull these up soon, but for now, here's the scenario that you're imagining. You are imagining that you are in the position of special education teacher, and this is no matter what your ultimate professional role will be, but you're going to do this from the perspective of a special education teacher who is working with transition age students. And so, for the purposes of IDEA, you're working with someone who's getting ready to turn 16 during the next IEP year. So, consider yourself as an early high school educator. And so, through this link, the case information includes these pieces of information. There's going to be a file which includes information from various psychological assessments. There is also a copy of a survey that you gave to your student, which they may or may not have received help from a parent, guardian, or other adult. It'll say so in the information. And also, there's information from an informal interview that you would have with the student as well as the parent or guardian. So what we're doing is pretending that this data has already been collected. And so now it's time for you to start drafting a PLAF. Now, I just want to make sure that I emphasize that an IEP is truly developed at the IEP meeting. So anything that you prepare in advance is considered a draft. It does help to have this information set up and prepared in advance. However, it doesn't become official until you have the meeting and the IEP team agrees and everybody signs. Okay, so now that I added that bit in there, so you have that information contained within two documents. Like we said, you're first introduced to a link with a Google Drive folder with case profile information. There are 5 cases, and you are to select one. I encourage you to read the profile information and determine which student you would like to work with for this activity. Okay, and we've already covered this part of the instructions. Let me bring you here to go through an example with you. Okay, so each of the cases that you see here that you will select from, each one will have 2 documents. You've got case and interview information in one document, and an example of a survey they completed is the other. In the case of this example, you'll see a third document, which is an example of the PLAF that was drafted based on the assessment information contained in these files. So the first document that includes case and interview information, wherever you see a blue background, that indicates that the information existed ahead of the transition assessment. Where you see a gold background, that indicates that the information was collected by you during this assumed transition assessment. That would include one survey and the name of it, and then the informal interview information. When I say informal interview, we could be talking about a parent teacher conference. It could be an email exchange between you and the parent guardian. It could be that you pulled the student aside one day at school and y'all had a conversation and you took down this information. And then also there's information collected from other teachers. As I stated, part of the information is going to be a survey that was completed by your case student. In the case of this example for George responded to these items over here. For the examples that you use, for the students that you worked with, you will notice that there may be additional comments that indicate somebody assisted them with completing the survey. And if so, it will indicate who helped them with that survey. Okay, so those are the two documents that you have available with all the information you will need to draft a PLEF statement for the transition plan. You may use this optional worksheet to help you organize details that could help you in drafting the PLEF. As it states here, and I've said verbally, this worksheet is optional, meaning that I believe that it could help you, but it's not something you have to turn in. But you will see that it prompts you to gather information here, and you would search the case profile details as well as the responses to the survey in order to find this information and use it in your composition of the transition PLEF. After you gather the information, whether you use this worksheet or not, this is when you want to compose it in this document. You want to access and save the transition PLEF template. There's not much to it. You're just simply filling out name, age, and grade here. And then below is where you will compose the PLEF. Now let's go back to this example that I've been referring to. I highly recommend that you read this example in its entirety. And so I won't go through it bit by bit because I know you can read it. However, I just want to point out that on the example in red font, I give you suggestions for how you can organize this. For the PLEF that you draft, you're not going to need that red font in the middle of it. You can just write it all as a continuous narrative. And now we are back at the instructions. So from there, you're provided an outline and explained that the PLEF should be written in narrative format. Well, I just presented you an example, and I also showed you an optional worksheet that has this same information on it. You do want to make sure that this information is included with adequate detail in the PLEF. And here is the rubric. You will see that for most of the criteria, you either meet the standard or you do not. And that is how the law works. It's not really something you can exceed on, but it is something that you can fail to meet. So you want to make sure that this content is included. And as I stated, that's going to be the most important part and where most of your points come from, that you have included the necessary content. And that even includes identifying who was involved in the process. That also ties to the part about assessment. Where did your information come from? I want to emphasize that because that's where students most commonly lose points, is neglecting to state that. Whatever you state for the strengths, needs, preferences, and interests do need to be connected to assessment. Once again, as I say that, assessment includes everything. It includes the survey they took, it includes the conversations that you had with different people, it includes existing information. Whatever is listed should align with what you reported in the assessment. And then there's professionalism, and this indicator counts twice. And so please read this information here. And so I am looking at things such as using person first language. I know that gets into some very controversial area because there are some persons with disabilities who prefer identity first language. Under IDEA, and as far as any written formal materials, the practice is still to use person first language. Also, it needs to be written in a professional way, but in language that can be understood by laypersons. So you're going to want to avoid any figurative use of speech. An IEP is intended to be very literal. So avoid any figures of speech and also avoid any jargon. That is one of the biggest criticisms of IEPs or any other document in our field, is that the language may be understood only by other educators. So be sure to avoid that. And then as far as correct grammar usage, being obviously proofread, but also there's a little bit of room to be a human being and miss something in your editing process. And so that would be worth a maximum of 6 points. Of course, to just meet the standard, it would be pretty similar and based on 90 to 95% of the product reflecting all this here. Altogether, this assignment has a maximum score of 20.